So we're going to pick back up where we left off, going over the historical and ethical considerations. So let me close this because it keeps crashing. So, all right, let's look at our ACA Code of Ethics. This is posted in the module, and I'm sure everybody's already super familiar with it, but I've gone ahead and highlighted some parts that I think are especially important and that we're also going to cover in the class. So Section E of the ACA Code of Ethics specifically covers assessment, and you'll see it says evaluation, assessment, and interpretation. Let's see, do I have a markup option here? Maybe? It doesn't matter. So, client welfare. Do not misuse assessment results and interpretations. Competence to use and interpret assessment instruments. So obviously in this class, we're not going to cover every instrument or every assessment technique. It is to lay the foundation so you have the knowledge to discern better and worse methods of assessment, right? It's kind of like with counseling theory. You all went over probably, I'll say 12 theories, but there's still many other ones out there. The purpose is to lay the groundwork so that way you have a starting point when looking at these things. So competence means both the ability to select an instrument, but also one that's within your wheelhouse, right? So I work a lot with young adults and do a lot of addictions work, body image and eating disorder stuff. I don't work very often with children though. And so I can legally get assessments for children, but ethically, I don't know anything about them, right? And so we want to keep it within the limits of our competence. Appropriate use, right? So when and how to do the assessments, which goes without saying. Now, here's what's interesting. So as I said in the earlier video, many times people get an assessment because there are maybe legal reasons for it, family reasons, right? Like wanting to adopt a child, things like that. So if you're making decisions, diagnosis, no diagnosis, recommending this, recommending that, advocating for accommodations of some type, right? You're doing it in an ethical way, and you have a thorough understanding of psychometrics, which is where we pick up next week. So you're understanding how and why the assessments are giving the results they did. And so if you were asked, so why did you pick this instrument? We're making this decision. Why did you pick it? You're able to say, because it is a very valid instrument and it gives reliable results, and we tested under these conditions and such. Informed consent. So I covered this before. You're explaining to them what's going on, and this is especially important. So important that I'm going to highlight it in front of you. The explanation will be given in terms and language that the client can understand, right? So starting next week, we're going to go into a lot of technical language, right? You can't just blurt out the technical jargon to your client, right? So instead of saying, well, yes, Mrs. Smith, your child scored 2 1/3 standard deviations below the mean, and that gives him a percentile rank of just over the 16th percentile. We picked the test because it had a strong Cronbach's alpha, and it had very good concurrent and predictive validity, right? Instead, you need to say, yes, Mrs. Smith, we found some learning problems with your child. He scored significantly lower than most of his same-aged peers. And we picked this test because in the past it has given accurate results, and it tests for the exact thing that we suspect that your child is struggling with, right? So we need to put it into an appropriate language. Who gets the results? Diagnosis. I won't spend a lot of time on that. That's what the other class is for. But you can use assessments for diagnostic reasons, but beware of cultural sensitivity, right? We don't want to pathologize non-pathological things, right? And that's the struggle with assessments, right? Where are they normed, right? And so when and how are they normed? You might be familiar, like right now in the UK, they're using an algorithm instead of their standardized test to place high school students in colleges and universities, and it is disproportionately favoring high socioeconomic status students, right? So the more well off your family is, the better a grade this algorithm gives, right? So socioeconomic status is a cultural factor, right? Or if it says this person communicates their feelings and it was normed on a population, or it was based on a population where sharing feelings is a positive, your client comes from a culture where they don't openly share emotions, and so this assessment pathologizes that. So you're being aware of the potential conflict between cultural factors and the assessment. Refraining from diagnosis. Just as a tidbit, because it comes up every time I teach diagnosis, you can refrain from giving a diagnosis if you believe it's going to harm someone or if you believe there's not a diagnosis there. Instrument selection, right? So we consider the validity, reliability, psychometrics, and appropriateness of an instrument. Hey, look at the syllabus. What are we covering over the next couple weeks? Psychometrics, reliability, validity, and then instrument selection, right? So that's all the stuff that we need to look at. I don't expect you to right now know what those things are. If you do, fantastic. Hopefully this bolsters your knowledge of it. If you're just now getting familiar with those concepts, don't worry. We all start at the same place. Don't worry. Counselors administer assessments under the same conditions that were established in the standardization. So what does standardization means? It means that it was set up in a standard way. So that way when I give the test and you give the test and Dr. Junkie gives the test, we're all administering the test in the same way, which is the way it was intended to be administered. And that counts for things like how we score and how we interpret. People, when they go rogue, start making mistakes, right? If the test should be administered only to an individual and not in a group, and this person thinks, I'm short on time, I'm just going to test both these people at the same time or test this group of people. Well, you're breaking the standardization, and that invalidates any results that you get. Unsupervised assessments. So there is an assessment security. So this is where I wanted to go to. Assessment security. So when you have an assessment, you can't just like leave it in your car, right? A lot of energy, time, and especially money goes into making these different assessments. So it's kind of like how they guard the SAT and the ACT and the GRE, right? Because if it got out and people started putting it all over the internet, as I imagine many would, if we did that with an IQ test, well then everybody knows the answers and the test is no longer valid, right? It won't predict or tell us anything because everybody knows all the answers. So you have to uphold test security and make sure that you have the assessments locked up and the manuals and everything squared away and taken care of. Don't use data or results from assessments that are obsolete or outdated. And counselors are use established scientific procedures to make them, right? So assessment is serious business, and you can make a whole career out of doing assessments. I can tell you firsthand, there's a shortage in San Antonio of people who will do this sort of assessment where you're making a bona fide report on a person saying, I think this person has a learning disability or has intellectual disability or they need a personality test. There are not many people here that do that. Because I think some people think testing is bad. There's a need for it, and not having those services, those clients are still going without, right? And it's not that assessment is bad, it's that we just need to be ethical about it. So speaking of Texas, let's look at Texas. Now, this is a great resource, and if there's interest, I'll make a video on this as well. So these are the rules for being an LPC, and you can go to the LPC board website and find these. I posted them, and I aside from all the the do's and don'ts of counseling, I want you to be familiar with it because it's really important when you get to the part where you're trying to get your license. So without making a whole big thing out of it, page 11, subchapter B, authorized counseling methods and practice. These are all the things that you can do as an LPC. These are all the things you can do as an LPC intern. There's 18 of them. You can do 17 of them as an intern. Individual counseling, group counseling, couples counseling, family counseling, addictions, rehab counseling, education counseling, career counseling, sexual issues counseling, referral counseling, psychotherapy, the list goes on. Play therapy, hypnotherapy, expressive modalities, biofeedback, assessing and appraisal. That's us. This is the one you can't do. Consulting, right? You can't be a professional counseling consultant until you're fully licensed. And crisis counseling. So, like I said, if there's interest over this is also a good barometer to see who's watching the whole video. If you're interested in knowing more about these and what you can do with your license, I'm happy to go over that because there's quite a bit of opportunity with it, even when you start out as an LPC intern. So let's look at the rules for Texas. Assessing and appraisal, etc. Formal and informal instruments and procedures, right? Because right now we're talking about tests and things like that, but there's also things like, you're asking someone to draw something or to imagine or to do something, right? Something that's more clinical. You get appropriate training and supervision. That's part of that training is this. And then as you move forward, if you want to know how to use maybe a specific instrument or go over a specific technique or something, then that's where those continuing education things come from. How to do it in individual and group settings. And we use assessment for the purposes of determining the client's strengths and weaknesses. So it's not all pathological. We're also looking for strengths and positive things. Mental status, emotional stability, intellectual ability, interests, aptitudes, achievement, and other characteristics. But you can't diagnose or assess for a physical condition, right? Makes sense, right? We're not trained for that. So Texas allows you to do it. The one thing that Texas does not let you do, though, it's coming. Oh, there it is. Testing. When you're testing, you gotta make the client known what's going on, right? Just like our national ethics. Don't reproduce or modify copyrighted tests. Don't administer a test without appropriate training. Observe testing, security. Now here's the thing. This PDF business I have only lets me use yellow. This should really be a red highlight. In Texas, LPCs cannot use standardized projective techniques, right? So that means you can't do the Rorschach, the ink blot. You can't do the other ink blot, the thematic apperception test, right? So you can't do those. So the two key words here are standardized and projective. Standardized we went over, right? It was rigorously normed and made, and it has a set of instructions, right? Every time you do this test, you do it exactly this way. Projective, right? This is where we're interpreting, right? So what do you see? So it's standardized projective. So those ink blots you can't do, but the less formal, less standardized things, like if I'm holding a glass and I say, is the glass half empty or half full? That's a projective thing, but it's not standardized, right? So we can't get testing kits that use projective things. If that is a sticking point for you, 49 other states. But also, I've never met anybody, nor have I ever thought, man, I was about to blow up before I found out that I can't do the Rorschach, right? We're not missing out on a whole lot here, right? And those are typically used for personality assessments, and those are like a dime a dozen, right? So you can find out if you wanted to do that and it was really bothering you and you wanted to know more about it, you look into it, but don't feel like you're really, oh man, like how am I going to make a living doing this, right? It's not going to be an issue for you. Well, that's going to do it for this video, the ACA Code of Ethics and the Texas Rules. Check out that page 12, that subchapter B, Counseling Methods and Practices, and see, what do you want to do after you graduate, right? Starting when you're an LPC intern and when you're fully licensed, right? Because there's a whole lot of stuff. I'm willing to bet most people, and I'm guilty of this as well, think, when I get it, I'm just going to do counseling. And you kind of have this idea of it's going to be in a room for 50 minutes with one other person, and that's about it, right? That's all we know. But look at all these other things you can do. My big soapbox is I don't like it when people tell us, LPCs, what we can and can't do. We have this board for a reason. Look at all these great things. You can get a great job out of grad school. You can get your hours quickly and efficiently, and then you can go off and do what you'd like. So lots of interesting things. I really hope you all look at it and kind of think. I know it doesn't necessarily all pertain to this class, but it's all together, right? I want to make sure that you guys are aware of what you can do with that and you feel good about your career options. So let me wrap up there. I hope everyone's doing well. If you have questions or concerns, let me know, and I'll talk to you again soon.